thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Preston Leftwich. I am a technical manager here at PathLock, specifically working in the last 25 years or so with JD Edwards, starting way back in the old days with XE, and migrating and working forward in the security designs and GRC compliance areas recently over the last 4 or 5 years. Part of that job path transfer for myself is working with one of the companies that have come together to form PathLock. QSoft in particular is sort of where I started, and as we all came together, we've started to sort of form a global GRC concept and construct. One of those products certainly we can demonstrate if you have any interest, where you have multiple application provisioning needs, or GRC requirements, SOD, things of that nature. We're certainly welcome to call us and reach out to me afterwards and talk about what that does. But specifically today, we're going to talk about the agenda around JD Edwards provisioning, what it is, why it's important, what it adds to our compliance lifecycle, and then we're going to do a little demo of the new enhanced version of that product in JD Edwards. So from a conversational perspective, requesting a role, it's the intermediary of where potential problems exist in companies. And to that extent, what I mean is, if you have a role and you've defined that role in the company, requesting a role to add to your functionality in the company happens for a number of reasons. One, because people change in the company, your job changes, people move, you acquire new companies, you have more responsibilities. And so requesting that role is something that is sometimes very difficult at a business level, because the explanation of what's going on with the role and tracking who made that request, who approved it, ownership of that tends to be a process that is not necessarily defined very well for people and organizations. And so what we're trying to do is make the process of, one, requesting the role, approving that role, and assigning that role, one, documentable, and two, traceable, so that you can understand what the job you're looking for requires, request the appropriate level of access, and then also double check to make sure that by creating that unique situation, you haven't added to your SOD conflict as part of the process. And so first thing is kind of a conversational point is, as a supervisor, you have multiple hands in the pot, right? So supervisors recognize that someone in their process needs more requested, more access for their business unit, people in their group. The help desk then takes on that particular process of looking at that either ticket system or that inbound email that says more system access needs to be in place. And one of the things we're going to talk about is the automation of that SOD check. So as much as it may happen in a system outside of JD Edwards, where people are looking at sort of roles that can't go together just by the role level, we want to include that SOD checking at the level of the request, because it's a unique situation and a unique set of understandings that go along with the data that you're being requesting for a user and what they have access to. Sometimes there's reasons for that. There's shortage in business units, or a shortage in the staff in a department, turnover, vacation, or possibly leave for a particular group of people. So it could be temporary, it could be a long-term solution. That sort of needs to be understood. And then from that perspective, there needs to be an approval, right? You need to be able to prove to an auditor that on any one given day, those reviews were done, they were approved, and that role assignment has been added to your system from a security perspective, so that there's a traceability from the supervisor through the approval process, and there's documentation that you can go into. And then as that access is granted and released into the business user, they're able to do their jobs and functions, and ultimately the auditor comes back, hopefully, because you're in an audit-worthy status, you can come back and provide that data about what happened and when. and at the end of it is the person who procures the actual software solution that we're going to talk about today. So as part of all of that goes, the idea that we want to focus on is what a request is. So the automation processes that we're going to talk about in this bigger picture here are the ability to quickly ask for a role, to quickly look at what goes on with a role, to put the automation in place so that there isn't a human error in that process, and a standard process that everybody in the organization understands. So it's very simple, a very transparent requesting process that everyone has the same activity set and everyone follows the same rules. And so the user out supervisor side of things are the ones that are going to actually make the requests, and then the help desk or the IT department is going to be handling that request. From a processing perspective, now that help desk is picked up or the IT department's picking up that automation, they're working at the risk level, which is we're going to automate the SOD process so that they understand any kind of decision making, reviews, updates, comments can be made as part of that process. And then we're going to push that response out into the security tool itself. And what that gives us is the opportunity for documentation, right? Documentation that a particular user on a particular date and time and a particular review has been done of that particular situation for a user's access, and that's been documented. Now you have that audit worthy data over the course of the year. That then gets us to a point where we're going to go through kind of the demo side of things. And if you haven't seen it yet before, this is the new version that we just released, the V6 version of JD Edwards from a PathLock on-premise JD Edwards solution. If you haven't seen this yet, and if you'd like to talk about this, I will put my name and email address up later so that you can take it down. It'll allow you to reach out, and we can certainly do a one-on-one demonstration of new functionality and so forth if necessary. But today I'm going to go over kind of some of the bullet points about this. I'm going to talk about some of the setups and configurations that you'll get from the product, some of the reporting that's available, and then we'll kind of go through the process of generating actual provisioning requests. So one of the things that happens is as you set up the process, one, we give you the ability to put in multiple approvers. So we'll give you the option to identify by role or by user those who can actually approve the role access. So as we all talk about user access management and then periodic review of access, what you see here is if you've already defined those role owners, you have those personnel who are looking over roles, you can actually define that matrix here so that as those requests come in, they're automatically funneled through the system into a group that is responsible for that role. That way you don't have to manage looking up who gets to make that decision. Is it department? Is it business unit? Who handles that kind of process? And one of the other things that we have is we have an opportunity to create job titles. So as a lot of us segregate roles down and get multiple roles in place for people, one of the things that job titling does is it allows us to create a matrix of multiple roles rolled into a business title. That way, if someone says, I need to be an AP accounts payable manager, I then have the opportunity to go in there and define all the roles that are necessary that make up that decision. So if I define multiple roles, I can add a data role here, business unit roles, things that select down the data, and I don't have to know this naming convention. I can simply know the description so that you can actually choose that as part of the process of making a provisioning request. Simplifies it, turns it into layman's terms so that you're able to actually work with that particular data. One of the other things that's important is we turn on auditing in this particular situation so that you can audit changes. This provides you immediate access to documentation during an audit if you need it, and that actually will give you the overview that you're looking for when someone says, on the 7th of May, how many people did we provision? To that end, the overall reporting piece, one of the things that goes along with user management is this is more than just provisioning. This is overall understanding what the documentation needs to look like. And a lot of this reporting here is based specifically on things that happen at the user level that may or may not be part of the provisioning process or the deprovisioning process. So for example, terminating an employee report, one of the things we do is we identify, a lot of us use search type X, for example, to say that an employee is no longer working in the company and it's excluded from all of the different processing in the system. Because of that, we actually have a process where whatever your category code is, whatever your address book search type is that removes users from the system, we will actually go through, make sure, one, that all the roles that they had are expired. We'll actually disconnect them from the JD Edwards database, and we'll make sure that everything has been shut down from that perspective. thoroughly completing that longer process of disconnecting from the system. Additionally, we have users that have no roles assigned to them that are inactive, or possibly disabled users that still have active roles. Sort of that follow through, that completion of taking someone in or out of the system and making sure things that have been utilized in the system. One of the ones that I use all the time is the enabled users that haven't signed in for a certain number of days, right? If you have someone who hasn't signed in for 30 to 60 days or 90 days, then something needs to be followed through. It triggers that follow-up, that touch point with the owner of the role, the business unit director, someone to say, how come this person isn't signing in? Maybe we can discontinue that access if they're not going to use the system. So part of the reporting piece is to give you further metrics about actual how users are being utilized in the system. And this system is designed to replace things like the 95.921, the sign-on screens for building users ad hoc. And let's go on, get into that kind of now so we can talk about what we're trying to accomplish. So the first thing I want to talk about is the role request piece. And to that end, requesting a role, as we roll these products out with customers, one of the things we talk about is this role request page can be put on any page. You can put this one application on your E1 pages, on your process flow, and your menu design, wherever you want. But what it does is it gives a very simple, straightforward workbench so that you can create a request or a disable request, who requesting it. It'll default in from the system, which will give you my name in this example because I'm signed in. You type in who you want to actually add a role to, and you can look up the role from lookups like you can normally in JD Edwards. You can add that end date like you would when you work with the 95.921. And then we have a couple of fields here that can be requirements, right? You can require a ticket number from ServiceNow or Freshdesk, whatever your service system is, and you can actually add comments about why this particular request is being made. One of the things that does is it provides you an opportunity to make requirements that other pieces ahead of this have been filtered. You can actually exclude duplication of ticket numbers, so you can't just type in 1111 every time, right? That's an interesting little nuance that as you set it up, you can do that. The other part about that is there's an opportunity in the system to look up a job ID. That ID we talked about before, where we had a system of record where, see, there you go, required fields, as they say. One of the things is you can look up a request by job description, and that gives you that ability to go in and look up that title that we were talking about before, where we're looking for a listing of multiple job titles, and that'll actually bring us into a position where I can look at that list of job titles by description, and when I bring that in, I can say, I want to attach that to myself without having to do all of the heavy lifting, and watch what happens. When I bring that in, I get all of those roles we talked about earlier, all in one fell swoop. That actually allows us to quickly manage in descriptive terms the roles and the requesting of roles. That translation, that matrix is key in the business asking for the right job. So that's something we set up as a process. And once that is actually selected, one of the processing options that exists in the background of our application structure is the ability to kick off an SOD. So what it does is as you save that record and click off the actual data, one of the things that we do is we actually run an SOD over top of the data. What that does is it preemptively turns on the segregation model that you've built in our Audit Manager tool. And if you have that Audit Manager tool, it will run the SOD. And additional to that, it will actually give you the violation listing to show you what this actually does, why this user having this access creates a problem in the system. And that will actually drag down into the details to say, where am I causing problems? I'm clear on lots of these, but I've got lots of problems, and it will actually define for you where the role is and what roles are causing you problems. That gives you accountability right out of the gate. Sometimes we have to override that. Sometimes you have to move on and even though you've failed the SOD, but you need to document that. You need to say, hey, this is failing SOD. There's a reason I'm requesting this. Maybe it's temporary. Maybe it's permanent based on changes in the department structure or acquisitions in your company. But that process of SOD checking proactively before you ever get into making decisions about roles expedites the process. There's no spreadsheets to look up. It's there and you can actually deal with that right off the bat. One of the things that goes along with that piece then is the actual connectivity that goes with it, right? So you can actually run the SOD check manually if you don't have the automation turned on, and you can email users within the requester about why this is a problem and maybe a justification about what's going on in the system. And to that end, if you need to, one of the things that gets set up as part of the process is a status flow from status 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like a next number would be in any other module in JD Edwards. And that is, when you're at a certain status, you're only allowed to go to the next status, right? You can either approve or reject it, because we've built the matrix that says you can only go from a status to one of these multiple options. You can't just jump to another status and skip over the approval process or the workflow process. So from a requesting perspective, this is a workbench that's worked. Just like in everything else that we've built in JD Edwards, you can export it using the standard JD Edwards tool sets to bring to meetings, to manage the data, to work with the data outside of maybe on the application side or maybe in a review meeting. And those two pieces sort of become the key components of what we find clients use at the help desk level. So putting a request in, getting it out to the business management staff so they can put requests in for their departments, and then the IT side of it, maybe the help desk side of it, that actually manages the request, looks at the request and approves it. But the other thing that we've done in the module that sort of gives us more access is, the goal is to be able to turn off the standard JD Edwards functions so that you can use more of our grid functionality in the system. So as most of us know in JD Edwards, one of the things that happens in the system is we end up having a lot of power forms, right? Well, that takes away some of that maintenance ability that goes along with JD Edwards. So we can actually give back that cataloging process of roles in the system. Again, export quickly all of the roles that are out in the system, that are out there, and you can add directly from that application. The other thing that we do is some quick sort of reviews of that dashboard in the system so that you can trace and track what's going on. All those details, who kind of larger records here about who is asking for what and where that status sits, whether it's been through the approval piece, whether it's been rejected or canceled. That sort of consolidated data is accessible in this dashboard, which gives you an export, again, something you can work on or off the system. And then we also added a sequence number build up here. And that sequence number is the one that tells you which role takes precedence when you're giving people multiple roles. And one of the things that I think a lot of clients misunderstand sometimes is the role sequencing piece is specifically designed to say that the highest numbered sequence role is the one that takes precedence. And what that means is that if you take the super user role and put it at sequence number 1, it's the first thing the system reads. It says, I'm going to set the variable of role for this user as the first record I get to. Much like a computer program, it goes back and forth until it gets to the end of this table. And if that role changes because you're assigned to a role that has a higher number, now you're on that role, and that grants or takes away access to a system. So understanding sequencing and being able to resequence effectively without power windows, power forms in the system, that gives us a quick win and a quick automation of role-based design. We also have opportunities to bulk assign roles to users. So if we put in a business unit or a data role in the system, you can quickly assign that to everyone in the system. You can actually, if we're all used to saying that the new person in the company, Barbara, has the same role as Dave, well, you can quickly copy everything that those two users have using this functionality here. And then there's also some other tabs that are actually important. The user maintenance side actually lets you from this one program jump straight to the singular program that builds a user. And one of the things that does is that allows us to not have to jump in and out of screens in the system. If you look at this screen from a build perspective, you'll notice that all of the data that goes along with building a user profile is here. You don't have to go anywhere else. There's no other drive to menus. There's no other moving around in the system. You can actually work with that maintenance side all in this one dashboard. And to that same thing, you can add a single user at a time. You can import a batch of users as you bring people in from spreadsheets. And you can actually do updates of security within inside of this particular program section. And additionally, as we kind of go through it, there's reporting about the SOD checking that's gone on in the background as you assign a variable set of SOD analysis. That's done as you configure this module. It's a processing option that you can set. You can report on that to provide auditors what kind of SOD checking are we doing when we do this particular thing. And then the next thing I think that's important kind of to discuss is the external request piece. And this is the tie-in that a lot of clients had asked for a few years. And a version or two ago, we came up with an inbound processor record. So we kind of built our own Z file. We set up the monitor, format it based on what the inbound ticketing system is. And then it works just like a normal Z file. The request comes in, it's built into the system with all the same variables that you type in manually. And then there's a process flag, just like in most JD Edwards Z tables. And one of the things that it does here, if it's past all the variables, if everything works perfectly, it'll process this record and create that actual ticketing record that we looked at the beginning of the demo. Whereas if it doesn't, it'll actually flag what's wrong. So if the title is wrong, the user doesn't exist, those type of things fail before this runs, it'll actually fail here, and you can simply edit it. Change the record to include the proper name, save the record, and it'll process automatically and build that record out in the system for us. So that integration is designed out of the box kind of to work with ServiceNow, but it's easily configurable to work with other solutioning systems and ticketing systems in our design of the product, if you will. So kind of in summary, the idea being that we deal with roles and we're working strictly with roles, whether we're building them from scratch, whether we're building them from copying them from other places. We have mass updating that we can do, bringing in a batch of role names and creating them from scratch, assigning those to users or copying them from users. And then down at the user level, we're also getting access to the user process, building a user access record one at a time, possibly doing it in bulk, so that we can do quick translations of inbound companies that are being acquired in our system or new departments maybe that are being brought onto the JD Edwards system. And all of that rolls back into that SOD analysis, which double checks to say in the unique situation of one user having those specific new roles and adding to that content, have we broken SOD? And as I always talk about when we do these kind of things, that really focuses on the bigger SOD picture, right? You build a role, make sure it by itself doesn't break SOD. Build a user checkpoint where if you create multiple roles against the user, they don't break SOD. And then third, the audit manager tool, which comes along and periodically makes sure nothing slips through the cracks, that someone hasn't manually gone in, created a record in the system, and possibly broken SOD for us. So that's kind of the overview of the product line. It actually fits in our larger package, right? So user manager is here, our role design and our security management piece is here, and the audit manager here allows us to do that periodic checking. The periodic review piece and the fraud management piece are additional modules that are out there to check things like role review and make sure that you've done periodic review of your roles and people are assigned to the right roles that we've just talked about designing. And then fraud detector is designed to look at transactional based record changes at a configuration level, not a detail level like a 911 or a 411 record, but specifically designed to look at changes in things like master data, bank accounts, accounting numbers, that kind of stuff. So if you have any questions about any of those things after this is over, you're certainly welcome to reach out to me. I'll spend some time walking you through the product and talk about any of the new information you'd like. We also have some collateral we can provide you as well. But with that, I'll look to see if anyone has any questions, Stephanie, and then I'll let you discuss what's up next.
Okay, thank you so much, Preston, for your presentation. Again, if you do have any questions, please add them now into the questions box that you'll find on your control panel. And while we're waiting for those, we just wanted to give you guys a couple announcements. Our next webinar having to do with JD Edwards is coming up on May 30th. It'll be comprehensive risk analysis for JD Edwards EnterpriseOne. It's not just about SOD. So if you want to attend that, that's on May 30th at 1 p.m. Central. And you will be able to find the announcement on our LinkedIn page, or feel free to email us at events@pathlock.com. We also have our Pathlock Innovation Series coming up on June 26th through 28th. We have a host of partners and customers that will be presenting for a 3-day period. A few mentions of partners and customers that are presenting will be Microsoft, Deloitte, Circo, and a bunch of other really exciting presentations that will be happening. So if you want to attend that, you can find the information to register for that on our LinkedIn page, or look for some upcoming emails from us about that. And with that, I don't see any questions. So we just want to say thank you so much for coming. And if you do have any questions, please reach out to us at info@pathlock.com, and we'll make sure that we answer those.